Moonbound Oath. Seraphina Winter had always been told never to speak the names carved into the old gravestones, but she never believed in curses. Then, one winter night, she traced the letters of a name that felt too familiar, one she had dreamed of, whispered in her sleep. The ground trembled beneath her feet. The wind howled, carrying the scent of fire and blood. And when she turned, he was there. A man with silver eyes and an unreadable expression, his presence as solid as the stone beneath her hands. "You called me," he murmured, tilting his head. "And now you cannot send me back." Chapter 1. The Awakening of Destiny. The old graveyard of Havenwood was Seraphina Winter's sanctuary. Not in a morbid sense, but in the way a forgotten library might offer solace to a scholar. The weathered headstones, leaning at odd angles, whispered stories of lives lived and lost, secrets buried beneath the moss and ivy. At 62, Seraphina felt a kinship with these silent sentinels, each marking a life that had weathered its own storms. Her own life, a tapestry of quiet resilience and muted grief, felt echoed in the stillness of this place. The November air was sharp, biting at her cheeks and stealing the warmth from her gloved hands. The setting sun cast long, skeletal shadows from the ancient oaks that guarded the perimeter, their bare branches clawing at the bruised, purple sky. Seraphina had come, as she often did, to visit her husband, Thomas. His grave, marked by a simple granite cross, sat beneath the spreading boughs of a particularly old yew, its dark needles almost brushing the inscription, "Beloved husband, forever in our hearts." She knelt, her joints protesting with a familiar ache, and placed a small bouquet of dried lavender and rosemary on the cold stone. "Another year, Thomas," she murmured, her voice a soft rasp against the rising wind. "Another year without you." It had been 15 years since the accident, a sudden, brutal tear in the fabric of her life. 15 years of navigating the world alone, the vibrant colors of her existence fading to a gentle, melancholic gray. She traced the familiar contours of his name, carved deep into the stone. Thomas. A good man, a kind man. Their love had been a comfortable one, a quiet companionship built on shared routines and gentle affection. But lately, a restlessness had begun to stir within her, a feeling of unfinished business. It was a disquieting sensation, like a forgotten melody playing just out of reach. As the last sliver of the sun dipped below the horizon, Seraphina's gaze drifted across the rows of headstones, each one a silent testament to mortality. She'd always been told by her grandmother, a woman steeped in the old ways and whispered superstitions of their Welsh ancestors, never to speak the names carved into the oldest stones, the ones shrouded in shadow and choked with ivy. "They hold the echoes of those best left undisturbed," she'd warned, her voice hushed with reverence and fear. "Some doors are meant to stay closed, Seraphina." But Seraphina had always considered herself a practical woman, a creature of logic and reason. Curses and restless spirits were the stuff of folklore, not reality. Yet, tonight, a strange compulsion drew her towards the oldest part of the graveyard, a section she usually avoided. It was as if an invisible thread tugged at her, pulling her deeper into the gathering gloom. She found herself standing before a particularly ancient grave, its headstone almost completely obscured by a thick tangle of thorny vines. The stone was cracked and weathered, the inscription barely legible in the fading light. A strange familiarity tugged at her, a sense of recognition that sent a shiver down her spine. It was a name she couldn't quite place, yet it resonated deep within her, like a forgotten dream. Hesitantly, she reached out, her fingers brushing against the cold, rough stone. She pushed aside the clinging vines, revealing a single word, etched in elegant, archaic script, Alaric. The name felt strangely familiar on her tongue, as if she had spoken it 1,000 times before, in dreams, in whispers carried on the wind. It was a name that echoed with a power she couldn't comprehend, a name that seemed to vibrate with a life of its own. And as Seraphina traced the letters, feeling the cold seep into her very bones, she felt a tremor run through the ground beneath her feet. It wasn't a dramatic earthquake, but a subtle vibration, a low hum that resonated deep within her chest. The air grew heavy, charged with an energy that prickled her skin. The wind, which had been a gentle whisper, now howled through the trees, a mournful cry that sent shivers down her spine. The scent of wood smoke, strangely mingled with the metallic tang of blood, filled the air. Seraphina pulled her hand back as if burned, her heart hammering against her ribs. She stumbled backward, her breath catching in her throat. Fear, raw and primal, flooded her senses. She wanted to run, to flee this place of shadows and whispers, but her legs felt rooted to the spot. And then she saw him. He emerged from the shadows of the ancient yew, his form coalescing from the darkness, like a figure woven from smoke and moonlight. He was tall, impossibly so, his presence dominating the small clearing. He moved with a grace that was both unsettling and mesmerizing, like a predator surveying its domain. His eyes, the color of polished silver, met hers, and Seraphina felt a jolt of recognition, a strange sense of inevitability. They were eyes that held both ancient sorrow and a terrifying intensity, eyes that seemed to pierce through her defenses, seeing straight into her soul. His hair was the color of raven's wings, framing a face that was both strikingly handsome and subtly inhuman. There was a sharpness to his features, a hint of something wild and untamed that sent a tremor of both fear and fascination through her. He wore clothes that seemed both ancient and timeless, a dark, heavy coat that fell to his knees, and beneath it, a shirt of some dark, unfamiliar material. He stood there, silent and unmoving, his gaze locked on hers. The air crackled with unspoken tension, the silence broken only by the howling wind and the frantic beating of her heart. Seraphina felt a strange pull towards him, a magnetic force that defied logic and reason. It was as if her very soul recognized him, as if they were bound by some invisible thread spun across centuries. Finally, he spoke, his voice a low, resonant murmur that seemed to vibrate in the very air around them. It was a voice that held the weight of ages, a voice that echoed with both sorrow and a hint of something else. Something that sent a shiver of both fear and anticipation down her spine. "You called me," he said, his silver eyes never leaving hers. He tilted his head slightly, a subtle gesture that was both questioning and accusing. "And now you cannot send me back." His words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. Seraphina stared at him, her mind reeling. She had called him? How? She hadn't uttered a spell, performed a ritual, done anything beyond tracing a name on an ancient gravestone. Yet, his words resonated with a truth she couldn't deny. She had called him, somehow, and now he was here. And the look in his silver eyes told her that her life, the quiet, predictable life she had known, was about to change forever. She opened her mouth to speak, to deny it, to ask him who he was, but no words came. Only the rising wind, and the growing certainty that she had stumbled into something far beyond her understanding. Chapter 2. Shadows in the Moonlight. The wind whipped around them, a vortex of fallen leaves and swirling dust, mirroring the chaos that had erupted within Seraphina. Her breath hitched, trapped somewhere between her lungs and her throat, a silent scream caught in the sudden, chilling reality of the situation. The man Alaric stood before her, an embodiment of the very shadows that had always lurked at the edges of her perception. I don't understand," she finally managed, her voice a trembling whisper that was almost lost in the wind's mournful cry. Her gloved hands, still tingling from the cold stone, clenched into fists at her sides. She felt a strange mix of terror and relief. Relief that the unsettling feeling that had plagued her for weeks had finally manifested into something tangible, even if that something was terrifying. Alaric's silver eyes, reflecting the faint moonlight that filtered through the skeletal branches of the yew, narrowed slightly. He didn't move, didn't offer any comforting gesture, but remained a statue of shadowed stillness, radiating an unnerving power. "You read the name," he stated, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate in the very ground beneath her feet. "You traced the letters. You spoke it aloud, even if only in your mind." That is a calling, Seraphina Winter. A binding call. His use of her full name sent a fresh wave of unease through her. How did he know her name? She had never seen him before in her life, had never spoken to him, yet he addressed her with an intimacy that was both unsettling and strangely familiar. She shook her head, trying to dispel the growing sense of disorientation. I didn't mean to. I don't even know what you are. Her words felt inadequate, flimsy defenses against the overwhelming presence of this man who seemed to have stepped out of a forgotten legend. A flicker of something, was it amusement? Annoyance? Crossed his features, gone as quickly as it appeared. He took a step closer, and Seraphina instinctively flinched, her body tensing, preparing for she didn't know what. But he stopped, maintaining a distance that was both respectful and subtly threatening. What I am, he said, his voice softening slightly, though the underlying power remained, is something you are not yet ready to understand. But you will. You have to. The air around them crackled with an unseen energy, a palpable tension that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. Seraphina felt a strange pull towards him, a magnetic force that defied logic and reason. It was as if her very soul recognized him, as if they were bound by some invisible thread spun across centuries. I don't believe in magic, she stammered, the words sounding weak and unconvincing even to her own ears. She had always prided herself on her practicality, her groundedness, but the events of the past few minutes had shattered her carefully constructed reality. Alaric gave a low, humorless chuckle, a sound that sent shivers down her spine. Belief is a luxury you can no longer afford, Seraphina. The world is far older, far stranger, than your modern sensibilities allow. And you have awakened something that has slumbered for centuries. He gestured towards the ancient gravestone, its inscription now barely visible in the deepening gloom. This is not merely a marker of death, Seraphina. It is a prison, a binding. And you, with your touch, your voice, your very presence, you have weakened the seals. Seraphina stared at the gravestone, her mind struggling to grasp the implications of his words. A prison? Seals? What was he talking about? It was all too much, too fantastical, too impossible. Yet, the look in his silver eyes, the intensity of his presence, the strange energy that thrummed in the air around them, it all spoke of a truth she could no longer ignore. I want to go home, she whispered, her voice barely audible above the wind. She felt a sudden, overwhelming urge to flee, to return to the safety and familiarity of her cottage, to pretend that this encounter had never happened. Alaric's expression softened, a flicker of something akin to empathy crossing his features. I understand, he said, his voice losing some of its harshness. But you cannot simply walk away. Not anymore. Your life as you knew it is over, Seraphina. You are bound to me now, whether you like it or not. The word struck her like a physical blow. Bound to him? What did that even mean? She felt a surge of panic, a desperate need to break free from this nightmare. Bound? She repeated, her voice rising in disbelief and fear. I am not bound to anyone. I am a free woman. He took another step closer, his shadow falling over her, enveloping her in his presence. She could smell him now, a strange, intoxicating scent of wood smoke and pine needles and something wilder, something that made her heart pound with a primal fear. Freedom is an illusion, Seraphina, he said, his voice a low whisper that seemed to caress her skin. We are all bound by something: duty, love, fate, or a curse. And you, Seraphina Winter, are bound by the curse that holds me here. A curse that you have unwittingly unleashed. He reached out, his hand hovering just inches from her face. Seraphina held her breath, her body frozen, caught between the urge to flee and a strange, inexplicable desire to stay. His fingers, long and elegant, were almost translucent in the moonlight, and she could feel the heat radiating from them, a warmth that seemed to beckon her, to promise something. Something she couldn't name, something both terrifying and alluring. The wind died down, leaving a pregnant, tense silence. The only thing she could do was meet his piercing gaze. Chapter 3. Whispers of the forgotten. His fingertips brushed against her cheek, a fleeting touch, feather-light, yet carrying the weight of centuries. Seraphina gasped, not from pain, but from the unexpected surge of warmth. It spread through her like wildfire, chasing away the chill of the night, settling deep within her bones. It was a warmth that was both alien and familiar, a warmth that resonated with a part of her she hadn't known existed. She flinched back, breaking the contact, her hand flying to her cheek, as if to hold the sensation captive. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic rhythm against the sudden, unnerving quiet of the graveyard. The wind had ceased its howling, the leaves had settled, and even the rustling of the ancient yews seemed to hold its breath. What was that? She whispered, her voice trembling, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and a strange, burgeoning curiosity. Alaric lowered his hand, his silver eyes studying her intently, their depths holding a mixture of ancient knowledge and a hint of something else. Something that looked almost like regret. A connection, he said, his voice a low murmur that seemed to wrap around her like a velvet cloak. A resonance. The curse that binds me, it also binds you. You felt it, didn't you? That pull. Seraphina nodded slowly, unable to deny the truth of his words. She had felt it, that strange, magnetic force, that sense of recognition, of inevitability. It was a feeling that defied logic, that bypassed her rational mind and spoke directly to her soul. But why me? She asked, her voice gaining a little strength, fueled by a desperate need to understand. I'm just an ordinary woman. I've lived a quiet life. I don't understand why this is happening. Alaric's gaze drifted towards the ancient gravestone, his expression shadowed, unreadable. Ordinary? He repeated, the word laced with a hint of irony. Perhaps. But you are also a descendant of the one who imprisoned me here, Seraphina. Your blood carries the echo of her power, her magic, and her guilt. Seraphina stared at him, her mind reeling. Her ancestor? Imprison him? It sounded like something out of a Gothic novel, not her life, not her family history. She had always known her family had deep roots in Havenwood, that they were descended from the original settlers, but there had never been any mention of magic, of curses, of anything remotely supernatural. My grandmother, she stammered, remembering the old woman's warnings, the whispered superstitions. She used to tell me stories about the old ways, but I thought they were just fairy tales. Fairy tales often hold grains of truth, Seraphina, Alaric said, his voice softening slightly. They are echoes of events long past, distorted by time and fear, but the core remains. Your ancestor, Rhiannon Winter, was a powerful woman, a wielder of ancient magic. She bound me here, centuries ago, to protect this town, this world, from what I was. He paused, his gaze hardening, his silver eyes flashing with a brief, intense spark of something that looked like anger. Or perhaps pain. What were you? Seraphina asked, her voice barely a whisper, her curiosity overcoming her fear, at least for the moment. He turned away from her, his gaze fixed on the distant, moonlit hills. He seemed to be struggling with something, wrestling with an internal conflict that was etched on his face. I was a protector, he said, his voice strained, his words carefully chosen. A guardian. But I was also a danger. My power, it was too great. It threatened to consume me, to turn me into something monstrous. Rhiannon saw that. She understood the risk. And she made a choice. A difficult choice. She sacrificed her own happiness, her own freedom, to bind me here, to contain the threat. He turned back to her, his silver eyes filled with a profound sadness that resonated deep within Seraphina's soul. She bound me with a curse, a powerful spell woven from her blood and her tears. And that curse, it is tied to her bloodline. To you. Seraphina felt a chill run down her spine, despite the lingering warmth from his touch. She was beginning to understand, to piece together the fragments of this impossible puzzle. Her ancestor, a powerful witch. Alaric, a being of immense power, imprisoned by her. And now, she, Seraphina Winter, the last of Rhiannon's line, had somehow weakened the seals, awakened him, and become entangled in a curse that had spanned centuries. "So, what happens now?" she asked, her voice trembling, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and a strange, inexplicable sense of responsibility. Alaric's gaze met hers, his silver eyes holding a depth of emotion that she couldn't fully decipher. "Now," he said, his voice low and resonant, "we unravel the curse. Together." The air shifted. A lone owl hooted somewhere in the distance. Seraphina didn't move, but suddenly the image of her quiet cottage, a warm fire, and a cup of tea seemed a lifetime away. Chapter 4. The Scent of Fire and Blood. The word together hung in the air, a fragile bridge spanning the chasm of centuries and mistrust. Seraphina stared at Alaric, her mind struggling to reconcile the image of the terrifying, otherworldly being with the almost vulnerable expression that flickered across his face. Unravel the curse?
How?
And what would that mean for her? For him? Together? She repeated, her voice laced with skepticism and a healthy dose of fear. How can we possibly unravel a curse? I don't know anything about magic, about any of this. Alaric gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, as if acknowledging the validity of her concerns. You may not know, Seraphina, but you possess the key. Your blood, your lineage, it holds the power to break the curse, just as it holds the power to maintain it. He gestured towards the ancient gravestone, its inscription now shrouded in complete darkness. Rhiannon's magic was intricate, powerful, but not flawless. She built safeguards, fail-safe ways for the curse to be broken, should the need arise. But those secrets, they are hidden, buried deep within the lore of your family, within the very fabric of this town. Seraphina felt a surge of frustration. But I don't know where to start. My grandmother, she died when I was young. And my parents, they dismissed her stories as nonsense. I have nothing, no knowledge, no guidance. A flicker of understanding crossed Alaric's face. Then we will find it, he said, his voice firm, resolute. We will uncover the secrets, piece together the fragments together. We have no choice. He took a step closer, and Seraphina instinctively tensed, her body bracing for she didn't know what. But he stopped, maintaining a respectful distance, his silver eyes holding hers captive. I know this is overwhelming, he said, his voice softening, losing some of its otherworldly quality. I know you are afraid. But I am not your enemy, Seraphina. Not anymore. The curse that binds us, it also makes us allies. We are two sides of the same coin, two halves of a broken whole. His words, spoken with such sincerity, such vulnerability, chipped away at her defenses. She found herself wanting to believe him, to trust him, despite the inherent danger that he represented. But a lifetime of practicality, of groundedness, held her back. How can I trust you? She asked, her voice trembling, her eyes searching his. You said you were a danger, that you were imprisoned for a reason. Alaric's gaze didn't waver. He met her challenge head-on, his silver eyes unflinching. I was, he admitted, his voice low and heavy with a hint of shame. I was consumed by my power, by the darkness that lurked within me. But centuries of confinement, they have changed me, Seraphina. I have had time to reflect, to learn, to control. I am not the same creature that Rhiannon imprisoned. He paused, his gaze softening, a flicker of something akin to hope crossing his features. I understand your hesitation, your fear. But I ask you, give me a chance.
Give us a chance.
Let us work together to break this curse, to free ourselves from this prison. His words resonated deep within her, stirring something within her that she hadn't felt in years, a sense of purpose, of possibility. She had spent the last 15 years living in a shadow of grief, a muted existence devoid of passion, of excitement. And now, suddenly, she was thrust into this extraordinary situation, this impossible partnership. Where do we even begin? She asked, her voice hesitant, but laced with a newfound determination. Alaric's lips curved into a faint, almost imperceptible smile. It was a subtle gesture, but it transformed his face, making him seem almost human. We begin with Havenwood, he said, his voice a low murmur. With the history of your family, with the secrets that are hidden in plain sight. We begin with a scent of fire and blood that lingers in this place, the echoes of the past that whisper in the wind. He extended his hand towards her, palm up, an invitation, a gesture of trust. Serafina hesitated, her mind warring with her instincts. But the pull, that strange, magnetic force that had drawn her to him from the beginning, was too strong to resist. She reached out, her fingers trembling, and placed her hand in his. His skin was surprisingly warm, not the cold, clammy touch she had expected. His fingers closed around hers, strong and firm, yet gentle. And as their hands met, another surge of that strange, familiar warmth flowed through her, a wave of energy that connected them, bound them together. The sensation settled, and a singular thought pushed through the haze of the night. This was only the beginning. Chapter 5. Echoes of a Broken Vow. The warmth that had spread through Serafina upon touching Alaric lingered, a comforting ember against the growing chill of the night. It wasn't merely physical, it felt deeper, a resonance that settled in her bones, a silent acknowledgement of the connection that now bound them. His hand remained clasped around hers, a solid, reassuring presence in the unsettling darkness of the graveyard. The scent of fire and blood. Serafina repeated, her voice a soft whisper, her gaze drifting across the shadowy landscape. I smelled it earlier, when you appeared. What does it mean? Alaric's grip tightened slightly, a subtle gesture of reassurance. It is the residue of the ritual, he explained, his voice low and resonant. The binding. Rhiannon's magic was potent, fueled by sacrifice. The fire was part of the incantation, the blood a symbol of the vow she made, the price she paid. Serafina shivered, despite the warmth emanating from his hand. The image of her ancestor, performing a ritual of such power, such sacrifice, was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. She had always dismissed her grandmother's stories as folklore, but now, standing here in the presence of this being, she could no longer deny the truth.
A vow?
She asked, her voice trembling slightly. What kind of vow? Alaric's gaze drifted towards the ancient gravestone, his expression shadowed, unreadable. A vow of protection, he said, his voice heavy with a hint of bitterness. A vow to keep Havenwood, to keep the world safe from me. She believed I was a threat, a monster that needed to be contained. And she bound herself, her bloodline, to that task. He turned back to her, his silver eyes searching hers, their depths holding a mixture of sorrow and understanding. She made that vow, Serafina, not out of malice, but out of love. Love for her people, for her town, for the world. She believed she was doing the right thing. Serafina felt a pang of sympathy for her ancestor, for the burden she had carried, the sacrifice she had made. She also felt a surge of anger, directed not at Rhiannon, but at the circumstances that had led to this impossible situation. But if she loved her people, Serafina said, her voice laced with a newfound determination, why would she bind her descendants to this curse? Why would she condemn us to this uncertainty? Alaric's lips curved into a faint, sad smile. Because she believed it was the only way, he said, his voice a low murmur. She believed that the power to contain me ran in her bloodline, that only her descendants could maintain the seals, keep the curse intact. And she also believed that one day, someone in her line would be strong enough, wise enough, to break it. He paused, his gaze locking with hers, his silver eyes shining with an intensity that took her breath away. She believed in you, Serafina. Even before you were born, she saw you in her dreams, in her visions, the one who would finally set us both free. His words resonated deep within her, stirring something within her that she hadn't felt in years, a sense of hope, of destiny. She had always felt like a bystander in her own life, a passive observer, carried along by the currents of fate. But now, suddenly, she was thrust into the center of this ancient drama, this epic struggle between light and darkness. But I don't feel strong, she whispered, her voice trembling, her doubts resurfacing. I don't feel wise. I'm just an old woman, living a quiet life. I'm not a hero. Alaric's grip tightened on her hand, his touch sending another wave of warmth through her. You are stronger than you think, Seraphina, he said, his voice firm, reassuring. You have faced loss, grief you have endured. And you have a good heart, a compassionate soul. That is what Rhiannon saw in you. That is what matters. He released her hand, and Seraphina felt a sudden, unexpected pang of loss. She missed the warmth, the connection, the sense of safety that his touch had provided. We should go, he said, his voice turning practical, his gaze scanning the surrounding darkness. It is not safe to linger here. There are others who might sense my presence, who might not be as welcoming. Seraphina nodded, her mind still reeling from the revelations of the past hour. She followed him as he led her through the maze of headstones, towards the wrought iron gates that marked the entrance to the graveyard. As they walked, she couldn't help but steal glances at him, studying his profile, the way the moonlight illuminated his features, the way he moved with such effortless grace. He was an enigma, a mystery, a creature of both darkness and light. And she was inextricably bound to him, drawn into his world, his fate their fate. They reached the gates, and Alaric paused, his hand resting on the cold iron. He turned to her, his silver eyes searching hers, their depths holding a question, a silent plea. Will you come with me? He asked, his voice low and resonant. Will you trust me enough to take this journey, to unravel the curse together? Seraphina looked at him, at the ancient graveyard behind them, at the quiet town of Havenwood spread out before them, bathed in the soft glow of the moon. She thought of her quiet life, her empty cottage, her solitary existence. And then she thought of the curse, of Rhiannon's sacrifice, of Alaric's imprisonment, and of the strange, undeniable connection that bound them together. She took a deep breath, the cold night air filling her lungs, and nodded. Yes, she said, her voice firm, resolute. I will. The gate creaked open, and together, they stepped out of the shadows of the past and into an uncertain and potentially dangerous future. Chapter 6. The Unveiling of Silver Eyes. The walk back to Seraphina's cottage was shrouded in a silence that was both tense and strangely companionable. The moon, a silver disk in the inky sky, cast long, dancing shadows that seemed to follow them, mimicking their uneasy alliance. Seraphina kept glancing at Alaric, studying him in the ethereal light. He moved with a quiet grace, an economy of motion that spoke of both power and control. He seemed to absorb the darkness, to blend seamlessly with the night, making him appear almost unreal. The scent of wood smoke grew stronger as they approached the village, the familiar aroma a stark contrast to the metallic tang of blood that still lingered faintly in Seraphina's memory. Her cottage, nestled at the edge of Havenwood, was a small, whitewashed building with a thatched roof and a garden that, even in November, still held the remnants of summer blooms. It was a haven, a place of peace and solitude, but tonight, it felt different. Invaded. Alaric paused at the gate, his gaze sweeping over the cottage, his silver eyes taking in every detail. It is charming, he said, his voice a low murmur, his tone surprisingly appreciative. Seraphina felt a flicker of pride. It was a simple home, but it was hers, filled with the accumulated memories of a life lived, both joyful and sorrowful. She had created a sanctuary, a place of refuge from the world, and now she was inviting a creature of darkness, of ancient power, into that sacred space. Come in, she said, her voice betraying a hint of nervousness. She pushed open the gate, the familiar creak sounding unusually loud in the stillness of the night. She led him through the garden, past the sleeping rose bushes and the frost-covered lavender, to the front door. She fumbled with the key, her hands trembling slightly, and finally managed to unlock the door. The scent of beeswax and dried herbs wafted out, a familiar, comforting aroma that momentarily eased her anxiety. She stepped inside, flipping the light switch, illuminating the small, cozy living room. A fire crackled merrily in the hearth, casting a warm, golden glow over the worn furniture, and the shelves lined with books. It was a scene of domestic tranquility, a stark contrast to the supernatural drama that had unfolded in the graveyard. Alaric followed her inside, his tall frame seeming to almost fill the small space. He stood just inside the doorway, his silver eyes scanning the room, taking in every detail: the faded floral wallpaper, the antique clock ticking on the mantelpiece, the framed photographs of Thomas and her family that adorned the walls. He seemed out of place, a creature of shadows and moonlight, standing in a room bathed in the warm glow of firelight. He was a stark reminder that her life had irrevocably changed, that she had crossed a threshold into a world she didn't understand. "Make yourself comfortable," Serafina said, gesturing towards the worn armchair by the fire. Her voice sounded strained, even to her own ears. Alaric hesitated for a moment, then slowly moved towards the armchair. He sat down, his movements surprisingly graceful for such a large man. He leaned back, his silver eyes fixed on the flickering flames, his expression unreadable. Serafina watched him, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and fascination. She had invited him into her home, into her life, and now she had to deal with the consequences. She busied herself with making tea, the familiar ritual a small comfort in this surreal situation. She filled the kettle, placed it on the stove, and reached for the mugs and the tea canister. Her movements were automatic, her mind racing, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. As she waited for the water to boil, she stole glances at Alaric. He remained silent, his gaze fixed on the fire, his profile etched against the warm light. She noticed the details she hadn't seen before: the faint lines around his eyes, the subtle curve of his lips, the way his dark hair fell across his forehead. He was beautiful, in a way that was both captivating and unsettling. The kettle whistled, breaking the silence. Serafina poured the boiling water into the mugs, adding a generous amount of honey to each. She carried the mugs over to the fireplace, placing one on the small table beside Alaric's armchair. "Thank you," he said, his voice a low murmur, his silver eyes meeting hers. She sat down in the opposite armchair, her own mug clutched in her hands, the warmth seeping through the ceramic, a small comfort against the lingering chill of the night. They sat in silence for a few moments, sipping their tea, the only sound the crackling of the fire and the ticking of the clock. The tension in the room was palpable, a thick, heavy blanket that seemed to suffocate her. Finally, Serafina broke the silence. "You said we need to find the secrets," she said, her voice hesitant. "Where do we even begin?" Alaric set his mug down on the table, his gaze locking with hers. His silver eyes, usually so guarded, so unreadable, seemed to soften. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "We begin with your grandmother," he said. "With her stories. With anything she left behind: journals, letters, books, anything that might hold a clue to Rhiannon's magic, to the curse, to the way to break it." Serafina nodded slowly. It made sense. Her grandmother, Alara, had been the keeper of the family history, the guardian of the old ways. "But I don't know if I have anything," she said, her voice filled with doubt. "My parents, they weren't interested in her stories. They probably threw everything away." A flicker of determination crossed Alaric's face. "We will look," he said, his voice firm, resolute. "We will search every corner of this house, every attic, every cellar, until we find something. We have to." Serafina looked at him, at the unwavering intensity in his silver eyes, and felt a surge of hope. Perhaps, just perhaps, they could do this. Perhaps, together, they could unravel the curse and find their way back to something resembling normal. Or something entirely new. The thought, both terrifying and exhilarating, kept her gaze locked with his. Chapter 7. A touch of forbidden warmth. The decision made, a fragile alliance forged over steaming mugs of tea, a palpable shift occurred in the small cottage. The initial terror Serafina had felt began to subside, replaced by a cautious curiosity and a growing sense of determination. Alaric, no longer a looming shadow of the graveyard, seemed to shed some of his otherworldly aura, becoming, if not entirely human, at least more approachable. "The attic," Serafina said, breaking the silence that had settled between them. "That's where my mother stored most of Alara's things. Boxes and boxes of stuff. I haven't been up there in years." Alaric nodded, his silver eyes reflecting the firelight. "Then that is where we shall begin." Serafina finished her tea, the warmth spreading through her, chasing away the lingering chill. She stood up, feeling a surprising surge of energy, a sense of purpose that had been dormant for far too long. She led Alaric through the narrow hallway, past the small guest room and the bathroom, to the end of the corridor, where a steep, narrow staircase led to the attic. The air grew colder as they ascended, the scent of dust and old wood replacing the comforting aroma of beeswax and herbs. The attic was a dimly lit space, filled with cobwebs and shadows. Moonlight filtered through a single, small window, illuminating a jumble of forgotten furniture, dusty boxes, and discarded belongings. It was a repository of memories, a graveyard of forgotten objects, each holding a whisper of the past. Serafina pulled the string to a single, bare bulb hanging from the ceiling, casting a weak, yellow light over the cluttered space. The shadows danced, transforming familiar objects into grotesque shapes, fueling a flicker of unease in her. Alaric stood beside her, his tall frame seeming to fill the confined space. He surveyed the attic, his silver eyes scanning the jumble of boxes and furniture, his expression unreadable. "It will take time," he said, his voice a low murmur, his tone surprisingly practical. "But we will search every box, every corner until we find something." Serafina nodded, feeling a surge of gratitude. She wasn't alone in this. She had an ally, a partner, even if that partner was a creature of ancient power and unsettling beauty. They began their search, starting with the boxes closest to the stairs. Serafina opened the first box, her hands trembling slightly. It was filled with old photographs, yellowed letters, and faded ribbons. She sifted through the contents, her heart aching with a mixture of nostalgia and regret. These were the remnants of her family history, the echoes of lives lived and lost. Alaric, meanwhile, began examining the other boxes, his movements methodical and efficient. He seemed to possess an uncanny ability to distinguish between the mundane and the potentially significant. He lifted lids, peered inside, his silver eyes gleaming in the dim light. They worked in silence for a while, the only sound the rustling of paper, the creaking of floorboards, and the occasional sigh or murmur of surprise. Serafina found herself watching Alaric, fascinated by his intensity. He seemed to approach this task with a single-minded focus, a determination that was both admirable and a little intimidating. He opened a particularly large, wooden chest, its hinges protesting with a loud creak. He reached inside, his long fingers brushing against something, and he froze. Serafina looked up, her heart skipping a beat. "What is it?" she asked, her voice a hushed whisper. Alaric slowly withdrew his hand, his fingers holding a small, leather-bound book. The cover was worn and faded, the title barely legible in the dim light. But Serafina recognized it instantly. "That's Alara's journal," she said, her voice filled with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. She had seen it before, years ago, but her mother had dismissed it as nonsense, filled with old wives' tales and superstitious ramblings. Alaric turned the book over in his hands, his silver eyes studying the faded inscription. This might be what we're looking for," he said, his voice a low murmur, his tone laced with a hint of hope. He opened the journal, the brittle pages crackling with age. The handwriting was elegant, spidery, but difficult to decipher in the dim light. Alaric held the book closer to the single bulb, his brow furrowed in concentration. Serafina moved closer, peering over his shoulder, trying to make sense of the faded words. She could see snippets of sentences, fragments of stories, references to the old ways, the binding power, the guardian of the shadows. Suddenly, Alaric stiffened. He pointed to a particular passage, his finger tracing the words. "Here," he said, his voice a hushed whisper. "Listen to this." He began to read aloud, his voice low and resonant, giving the ancient words a power, a resonance, that sent shivers down Seraphina's spine. The guardian sleeps, bound by blood and sorrow, but the key to his freedom lies within the heart of the one who calls him forth. A touch, a word, a sacrifice, these are the threads that weave the spell, the bonds that can be broken only by the hand of a true descendant. He stopped reading, his silver eyes meeting Seraphina's. The air in the attic seemed to crackle with an unseen energy, a palpable tension that made her breath catch in her throat. A touch, Seraphina whispered, remembering the warmth that had surged through her when Alaric had touched her cheek. A word, the name, Alaric, whispered on her lips, in her dreams. Alaric reached out, his hand hovering just inches from her face. His fingers, long and elegant, were almost translucent in the dim light. And Seraphina felt that pull, that magnetic force, that undeniable connection stronger than ever before. His warmth seemed to call to a hidden place within her. Chapter 8. The Dance of Fear and Desire. His fingertips brushed against her cheek, a mirror of their encounter in the graveyard, but this time, the sensation was different. It wasn't just warmth, it was a jolt, an electric current that arced between them, sending a shiver through her entire body. It was a feeling of recognition, of inevitability. But it was also tinged with fear, a primal awareness of the power that emanated from him, the danger that he represented. Seraphina instinctively stepped back, breaking the contact, her hand flying to her cheek, as if to hold the sensation captive. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic rhythm against the sudden, unnerving silence of the attic. The single bulb flickered, casting dancing shadows that seemed to writhe and twist, mirroring the turmoil within her. She stammered, her voice trembling, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and a strange, burgeoning desire. It was a desire that she hadn't felt in years, a desire that she thought had been buried with Thomas, with her old life. But it was here, now, undeniable and terrifying. Alaric lowered his hand, his silver eyes studying her intently, their depths holding a mixture of understanding and something else. Something that looked almost like hunger. It was a hunger that mirrored her own, a hunger that spoke of a deeper connection, a bond that transcended logic and reason. "Don't be afraid, Seraphina," he said, his voice a low murmur that seemed to wrap around her like a velvet cloak. "I won't hurt you. I would never hurt you." But Seraphina wasn't so sure. She had seen the power in his eyes, the darkness that lurked beneath the surface. She had felt the wildness that emanated from him, the untamed energy that threatened to consume him, to consume her. "But you could," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the frantic beating of her heart. "You said it yourself, you were a danger. You were imprisoned for a reason." Alaric's expression softened, a flicker of regret crossing his features. "I was," he admitted, his voice low and heavy with the weight of centuries. "But I am not that creature anymore, Seraphina. I have changed. I have learned control." He took a step closer, and Seraphina instinctively tensed, her body bracing for flight. But she didn't run. She stood her ground, her gaze locked with his, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and a strange, inexplicable fascination. "How can I trust you?" she asked, her voice trembling, her eyes searching his. "How can I be sure?" Alaric's gaze didn't waver. He met her challenge head-on, his silver eyes unflinching. "You cannot be sure," he said, his voice a low whisper. "Trust is a risk, Seraphina. It always is. But sometimes it is the only way." He reached out again, his hand hovering just inches from her face. This time, Seraphina didn't flinch. She held her breath, her body frozen, caught between the urge to flee and a strange, overwhelming desire to surrender. "Let me show you," he said, his voice a low murmur, his silver eyes burning with an intensity that took her breath away. "Let me show you who I am now. Let me show you the truth." His fingertips brushed against her cheek again, and this time, Seraphina didn't pull away. She closed her eyes, allowing the sensation to wash over her, to envelop her. The warmth spread through her, melting away the fear, the doubt, the resistance. It was a warmth that was both comforting and exhilarating. A warmth that awakened something deep within her, something primal, something forbidden. She felt a connection to him, a bond that defied logic, that bypassed her rational mind and spoke directly to her soul. It was a connection that had been forged centuries ago, by her ancestor, by a curse, and by a love that had transcended time and space. She opened her eyes, her gaze locking with his. His silver eyes, usually so guarded, so unreadable, were now filled with a vulnerability, a longing, that mirrored her own. She saw past the darkness, past the power, past the danger. She saw him. Alaric. The man, not the monster. And in that moment, Seraphina knew that she was lost. She had stepped over the threshold, crossed the point of no return. She was bound to him, body and soul, by a curse, by fate, and by a desire that she could no longer deny. "Show me," she whispered, her voice barely audible, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and anticipation. She felt, almost palpably, the ancient magic in the room shift and settle around them, a silent witness to a turning point. Chapter 9. Beneath the Weeping Willow. The touch lingered, a silent promise hanging between them, a fragile bridge built across a chasm of fear and desire. Alaric's silver eyes, reflecting the dim light of the attic, held a depth of emotion that Seraphina couldn't fully decipher, a mixture of longing, regret, and something else, something that looked almost like hope. He slowly lowered his hand, breaking the physical contact, but the connection remained, an invisible thread that bound them together, a palpable energy that thrummed in the air around them. "Not here," he said, his voice a low murmur, his gaze sweeping over the cluttered attic, the dusty boxes, the forgotten remnants of the past. "There is a place where Rhiannon's power is stronger, where the veil between worlds is thinner. A place where I can show you." Seraphina nodded, her mind still reeling from the intensity of the encounter. She trusted him, she realized, with a certainty that defied logic, that bypassed her rational mind and spoke directly to her soul. It was a trust that was born of a deeper connection, a bond that transcended their individual identities, their separate histories. "Where?" she asked, her voice a soft whisper, her heart pounding with a mixture of anticipation and a lingering trace of fear. "The Weeping Willow," he said, his voice a low rumble, his gaze fixed on hers. "By the river. Do you know it?" Seraphina nodded again. She knew the place well. It was a secluded spot, hidden from the main paths, where a giant weeping willow, its branches draped like a curtain of sorrow, leaned over the gently flowing river. It was a place of beauty and tranquility, a place where she had often gone as a child, seeking solace and escape. It's a long walk," she said, her voice betraying a hint of hesitation. The night was cold, the path was uneven, and she was not as young as she used to be. Alaric's lips curved into a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "I will carry you," he said, his voice firm, resolute. Seraphina's eyes widened in surprise. Carry her? It was a preposterous idea, yet strangely appealing. She hadn't been carried since she was a child, since her father had scooped her up in his arms, making her feel safe and protected. "I couldn't possibly," she stammered, her cheeks flushing with a mixture of embarrassment and a strange, unexpected thrill. Alaric stepped closer, his tall frame towering over her, his presence both intimidating and comforting. "It is no burden, Seraphina," he said, his voice a low whisper, his silver eyes shining with an intensity that took her breath away. "It would be my pleasure." And before she could protest further, he gently scooped her up in his arms, as if she were weightless, as if she were a child again. Seraphina gasped, her arms instinctively wrapping around his neck, her body tensing in surprise. He was strong, incredibly so, his muscles firm beneath the fabric of his coat. She could feel the warmth radiating from him, a comforting heat that chased away the chill of the night. He held her close, his breath warm against her ear, his scent that intoxicating mixture of wood smoke, pine needles, and something wilder filling her senses. Seraphina closed her eyes, allowing herself to be carried, to be held, to be protected. It was a feeling she hadn't realized she had missed so much, a feeling of security, of belonging. He carried her out of the attic, down the narrow stairs, through the cozy living room, and out into the cold night air. The moon, a silver disk in the inky sky, illuminated their path, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to follow them, silent witnesses to their unusual journey. The walk to the river was shorter than she remembered, or perhaps it was simply that Alaric's presence, his strength, his closeness, made the distance seem insignificant. He moved with a quiet grace, his steps sure and steady, even on the uneven ground. They reached the weeping willow, its branches draped like a curtain of sorrow, its leaves rustling softly in the gentle breeze. The river flowed nearby, its gentle murmur a soothing counterpoint to the pounding of her heart. Alaric gently lowered her to the ground, his hands lingering on her waist for a moment, sending a shiver through her. He stepped back, giving her space, but the connection remained, an invisible thread that bound them together. "This is it," he said, his voice a low murmur, his gaze sweeping over the secluded spot. "This is where Rhiannon performed the ritual, the binding. The energy, it is still here, lingering in the air, in the earth, in the water." Seraphina looked around, her eyes adjusting to the dim light. She could feel it, too, a subtle vibration, a tingling sensation on her skin, a sense of something ancient, something powerful. What do I do?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly, her heart pounding with a mixture of anticipation and fear. Alaric stepped closer, his silver eyes locking with hers. "You trust," he said, his voice a low whisper. "You open yourself. You allow me to show you." He reached out, his hand hovering just inches from her face, and Seraphina closed her eyes, taking a deep breath, preparing herself for she didn't know what. This time, however, he did not touch her skin. He closed his own eyes, and a soft silver light started to emanate from him, bathing Seraphina in its glow. She could feel something, but she couldn't explain what it was. Chapter 10. Secrets Carved in Stone. The silver light emanating from Alaric intensified, illuminating the secluded clearing beneath the weeping willow, chasing away the shadows, transforming the familiar landscape into something ethereal, something magical. Seraphina, bathed in the silvery glow, felt a strange calmness wash over her, a sense of peace that transcended the fear, the uncertainty, the strangeness of the situation. She opened her eyes, her gaze fixed on Alaric. He remained still, his eyes closed, his face serene, his body radiating a power that was both awe-inspiring and comforting. The light seemed to emanate from within him, from his very core, a manifestation of the ancient energy that flowed through him, the power that Rhiannon had sought to contain. And then she saw it. Faint images began to flicker around him, like projections on a screen, like scenes from a forgotten dream. They were fleeting, fragmented, but Seraphina could make out glimpses of things. A woman, tall and regal, with fiery red hair and piercing green eyes. Rhiannon. A circle of standing stones, bathed in moonlight. A ritual, a chant, a sacrifice. Alaric, younger, wilder, his eyes burning with a fierce, untamed power. A battle, a clash of forces, a desperate struggle, and then darkness. The images swirled and shifted, becoming more vivid, more coherent. Seraphina saw Rhiannon, her face etched with sorrow and determination, carving symbols onto the ancient stones, weaving a spell, a binding a prison. She saw Alaric, struggling against the invisible bonds, his eyes filled with rage and despair. She saw the connection between them, a shimmering thread of energy, a bond of blood and magic, a curse. And then she saw something else. Something that made her heart skip a beat. A hidden chamber, beneath the standing stones, a secret place where Rhiannon had stored something. A book, bound in silver, its pages filled with intricate symbols, with ancient knowledge, with the key to breaking the curse. The images faded, the silver light receding, leaving Seraphina breathless and disoriented. Alaric slowly opened his eyes, his gaze meeting hers. His silver eyes, usually so intense, so unreadable, were now filled with a profound sadness, a weariness that spoke of centuries of confinement, of longing. Did you see it?" he asked, his voice a low murmur, his tone laced with a hint of hope. Seraphina nodded, her mind still reeling from the visions. "Yes," she whispered, her voice trembling.
"I saw Rhiannon."
"The ritual. The hidden chamber. The book." Alaric's lips curved into a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "The grimoire," he said, his voice a low rumble. "It holds the secrets of Rhiannon's magic, the details of the curse, and the way to break it." Seraphina felt a surge of excitement, a glimmer of hope in the darkness. They had a lead, a direction, a possibility. "But where is it?" she asked, her voice filled with a newfound determination. "The standing stones, they're gone, aren't they? Destroyed centuries ago." Alaric shook his head. "Not destroyed," he said, his voice firm, resolute. "Hidden. Concealed." Rhiannon knew that the curse might need to be broken one day. She wouldn't have left it to chance. She would have protected the grimoire, hidden it somewhere safe. He paused, his gaze drifting towards the river, his expression thoughtful. The stones, they were once part of a larger structure, a temple, perhaps, a place of power. And the river, it flows through the heart of Havenwood, connecting all the sacred places, all the sites of ancient energy. He turned back to her, his silver eyes locking with hers. "We need to find the location of the original temple," he said, his voice a low whisper. "We need to follow the river, search for clues, for signs. The grimoire is out there, Seraphina, waiting for us." Seraphina nodded, her mind racing. It made sense. The river, it was a constant, a thread that connected the past to the present, a source of life and magic. "There's an old map," she said, her voice suddenly filled with excitement. "In the local history museum. It shows Havenwood as it was centuries ago, before the town was modernized. It might show the location of the temple." Alaric's eyes lit up, a spark of hope igniting in their silvery depths. "Then that is where we shall go," he said, his voice firm, resolute.
"Tomorrow.
"We will find the map, we will find the temple, and we will find the grimoire." He reached out, his hand hovering just inches from her face, and Seraphina felt that familiar pull, that magnetic force, that undeniable connection stronger than ever before. But this time, there was no fear, no hesitation. Only trust, only hope, and a shared determination to break the curse that bound them together. The river continued to flow beside them, reflecting the moonlight and whispering secrets to the ancient willow. Chapter 11. The Price of a Soul Bond. The Havenwood Historical Museum was a small, unassuming building nestled between the bakery and the post office on Main Street. It was a place Seraphina had visited many times over the years, usually with Thomas, seeking a glimpse into the town's past, a connection to the generations that had come before them. But today, her visit had a different purpose, a far more urgent and dangerous mission. Alaric, surprisingly, blended in seamlessly with the morning crowd. He had shed his heavy coat, revealing a simple, dark shirt and trousers that, while still somewhat out of place, didn't draw undue attention. He moved with a quiet confidence, his silver eyes scanning the surroundings, taking in every detail, as if assessing potential threats. Seraphina, however, felt a nervous flutter in her stomach. She was still adjusting to this new reality, this world of ancient curses and hidden magic, this impossible partnership with a being who was both terrifying and alluring. They entered the museum, the familiar scent of old paper and beeswax filling Seraphina's senses. The curator, Mrs. Gable, a small, elderly woman with a keen interest in local history, greeted Seraphina with a warm smile. "Seraphina, dear, it's lovely to see you. What brings you in today?" Seraphina returned the smile, trying to appear calm and casual, despite the frantic beating of her heart. "Good morning, Mrs. Gable. I was wondering, do you still have that old map of Havenwood? The one that shows the town as it was centuries ago?" Mrs. Gable's eyes lit up. "Of course. It's one of our most prized possessions. Are you researching something specific?" Serafina hesitated for a moment, unsure how much to reveal. Just family history, she said, vaguely. My grandmother, she used to tell me stories about the old days. Mrs. Gable nodded, her expression understanding.
Ah, Ilara.
A fascinating woman, full of old tales. She led them towards the back of the museum, to a large, glass-covered display case. Inside, carefully preserved, was the map. It was a beautiful piece of work, hand-drawn on aged parchment, depicting Havenwood as a small, rural settlement, surrounded by forests and fields. The river, clearly marked, wound its way through the center of the town, its course significantly different from its present-day configuration. And there, on the banks of the river, just outside the settlement, was a symbol that Serafina recognized instantly, a circle of standing stones. There, she said, pointing to the symbol, her voice a hushed whisper. That's what we're looking for. Alaric, who had been standing silently beside her, leaned closer, his silver eyes studying the map intently. He traced the course of the river with his finger, his expression thoughtful. It's further north than I expected, he said, his voice a low murmur. The landscape has changed significantly over the centuries. But this gives us a starting point. Serafina felt a surge of hope. They had found it. A clue, a lead, a direction. Mrs. Gable, oblivious to the true significance of their discovery, beamed with pride. Isn't it wonderful? A glimpse into our past. It's amazing how much things have changed. Serafina forced a smile. Yes, amazing, she said, her voice betraying a hint of irony. They thanked Mrs. Gable, and Alaric, ever the gentleman, even made a small donation to the museum, much to Serafina's surprise. As they left the building, stepping back out into the bright sunlight, Serafina felt a renewed sense of purpose, a determination to unravel the mystery, to break the curse. But as they walked, Alaric's expression grew somber. He stopped, his hand gently resting on her arm, stopping her in turn. Serafina, he said, his voice low and serious, his silver eyes searching hers. There is something you need to understand. About the curse, about the soul bond. Serafina's heart skipped a beat. The soul bond. She had heard him mention it before, but she hadn't fully grasped the implications. What is it? She asked, her voice trembling slightly, her eyes filled with a mixture of apprehension and curiosity. Alaric took a deep breath, his gaze holding hers captive. The curse that Rhiannon created, it didn't just imprison me, he said, his voice heavy with the weight of centuries. It bound our souls together. Yours and mine. Across time and space. Serafina stared at him, her mind struggling to comprehend the enormity of his words. Bound souls? What did that even mean? It means we are connected, he explained, his voice a low whisper. On a level that goes beyond the physical, beyond the emotional. We are two halves of a whole, inextricably linked, our fates intertwined. He paused, his gaze softening, a flicker of something else crossing his features. Something that looked almost like tenderness. It means I can feel your emotions, your fears, your desires, he said, his voice a low murmur, his silver eyes burning with an intensity that took her breath away. And you can feel mine. Serafina felt a blush creep up her cheeks. She had felt it, hadn't she? That strange connection, that sense of recognition, that pull. It wasn't just attraction, it was something deeper, something more profound. It was frightening and exhilarating. But what does it mean for us? She asked, her voice barely a whisper, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and a strange, undeniable excitement. It means we are in this together, Alaric said, his voice firm, resolute. For better or for worse. Until the curse is broken, or until we both cease to exist. The weight of his words settled upon her, a heavy truth and a chilling realization. Chapter 12. Running from the inevitable. The revelation of the soul bond hung heavy in the air, a suffocating blanket of inevitability. Serafina felt a surge of panic, a desperate need to escape, to run from this impossible situation, this inescapable connection. She turned away from Alaric, her gaze fixed on the bustling street, the ordinary people going about their ordinary lives, oblivious to the ancient drama that was unfolding around them. I need some air, she stammered, her voice trembling, her legs feeling weak and unsteady. Without waiting for a response, she started walking, quickly, blindly, away from Alaric, away from the museum, away from everything. She needed to think, to process, to breathe. She walked for blocks, her mind racing, her heart pounding. The soul bond, it was a terrifying concept, a violation of her privacy, her autonomy, herself. She was bound to him, this creature of darkness, this ancient being, this man. Her fate, her emotions, her very existence intertwined with his. She found herself in the town square, a small, park-like area with a fountain in the center and benches scattered around. She sat down heavily on one of the benches, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She closed her eyes, trying to calm her racing heart, to regain some semblance of control. But it was no use. The image of Alaric, his silver eyes, his intense gaze, his presence, filled her mind. She could feel him, even now, a subtle presence at the edge of her awareness, a faint echo of his emotions, concern, worry, and something else. Something that felt almost like sadness. She opened her eyes, her gaze fixed on the fountain, the water cascading down, a soothing, rhythmic sound that usually calmed her. But today, it offered no solace, no escape. She didn't know how long she sat there, lost in her thoughts, her fears, her confusion. But eventually, she felt a presence beside her. She didn't need to look to know who it was. Alaric sat down beside her, on the bench, maintaining a respectful distance, but his presence was undeniable. She could feel the warmth radiating from him, a comforting heat that seemed to seep into her bones, chasing away the chill of the autumn air. "Seraphina," he said, his voice low and gentle, his tone laced with concern. "Are you all right?" She didn't answer, couldn't answer. She was too overwhelmed, too confused, too afraid. He didn't press her. He simply sat there, silent, his presence a steady, reassuring anchor in the storm of her emotions. He respected her need for space, her need to process. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Seraphina spoke. I don't understand," she said, her voice trembling, her gaze fixed on the fountain. "Why me? Why us?" Alaric sighed, his gaze drifting towards the sky, his expression clouded with regret. "I don't know, Seraphina," he said, his voice a low murmur. "Fate, perhaps. Destiny. Or simply a cruel twist of magic." He turned to her, his silver eyes searching hers, their depths holding a mixture of understanding and something else. Something that looked almost like apology. "I know this is difficult," he said, his voice a low whisper. "I know you are afraid. But I swear to you, Seraphina, I will do everything in my power to protect you, to help you to break this curse." His words, spoken with such sincerity, such vulnerability, chipped away at her defenses. She wanted to believe him, to trust him, despite the inherent danger that he represented. "But what if we can't?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper, her eyes filled with a desperate plea. "What if the curse is unbreakable?" Alaric's gaze didn't waver. He met her challenge head-on, his silver eyes unflinching. "Then we will face it together," he said, his voice firm, resolute. "We will fight. We will endure. We are bound, Seraphina, whether we like it or not. And we will face our fate together." His words resonated deep within her, stirring something within her that she hadn't felt in years, a sense of defiance, of courage. She had spent the last 15 years living in a shadow of grief, a muted existence devoid of passion, of fight. But now, suddenly, she was faced with a challenge, a threat, a purpose. She looked at him, at the ancient being who was both her captor and her companion, her enemy and her ally. And she knew that she couldn't run, she couldn't hide, she couldn't escape. She was bound to him, body and soul, by a curse, by fate, and by a growing connection that she could no longer deny. She took a deep breath and turned to face him, her decision made. Chapter 13. The hunter's moon. The decision made, a fragile truce established, Seraphina and Alaric returned to the task at hand, finding the grimoire. The map from the museum provided a general location, a starting point, but the landscape had changed dramatically over the centuries. The forest that had once surrounded Havenwood had been partially cleared, roads had been built, and the river itself had been altered by dams and diversions. They decided to start their search the following day, under the light of the full moon, the hunter's moon, a celestial event that, according to Alara's journal, held a particular significance in the old ways. The journal mentioned that certain spells, certain rituals, were more potent under the full moon, especially the hunter's moon, which amplified the connection to the earth, to the ancestors, to the otherworld. Seraphina spent the rest of the day preparing, gathering supplies, and poring over Alara's journal, trying to glean any additional clues, any hidden insights. The journal was a treasure trove of information, a mixture of practical advice, herbal remedies, and cryptic pronouncements about magic, curses, and werewolves. The mention of werewolves sent a shiver down Seraphina's spine. She had always dismissed them as creatures of myth, of folklore, but now, in this new reality, she couldn't be so sure. Alaric had never explicitly stated what he was, but the hints were there: the wildness in his eyes, the power that emanated from him, the talk of being a protector and a danger. As night approached, Seraphina felt a growing sense of unease, a prickling sensation on her skin. The full moon, a giant silver orb in the inky sky, cast an eerie glow over Havenwood, transforming the familiar landscape into something otherworldly. Alaric arrived at her cottage shortly after sunset, his presence both reassuring and unsettling. He was dressed in dark clothing, blending seamlessly with the shadows, his silver eyes gleaming in the moonlight. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice a low murmur, his gaze searching hers. Seraphina nodded, her heart pounding with a mixture of anticipation and fear. She had packed a bag with essentials: a flashlight, a compass, a first aid kit, and, at Alaric's suggestion, a small silver knife, a relic from Alara's collection, said to possess protective properties. They set off, walking north, following the general direction indicated by the old map. The moon illuminated their path, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to follow them, silent witnesses to their quest. The forest was eerily quiet, the usual sounds of nocturnal creatures muted, as if holding their breath in anticipation. The air was thick with the scent of pine needles and damp earth, mingled with that faint, metallic tang of blood that Seraphina had come to associate with Alaric's presence. They walked for hours, the silence broken only by the rustling of leaves and the occasional snap of a twig underfoot. Seraphina found herself relying on Alaric's guidance, his instincts, his knowledge of the terrain. He moved with a quiet grace, an economy of motion that spoke of both power and control. He seemed to know the forest intimately, as if he had walked these paths countless times before. As they neared the area indicated on the map, Alaric stopped. He lifted his head, sniffing the air, his silver eyes scanning the surrounding trees. "We're close," he said, his voice a low whisper. "I can feel it. The energy, it's stronger here." Seraphina felt it too, a tingling sensation on her skin, a subtle vibration in the air, a sense of something ancient, something powerful. They continued walking, their pace slowing, their senses heightened. And then they saw it. A clearing, bathed in moonlight, surrounded by a circle of ancient, gnarled trees. In the center of the clearing, partially hidden by overgrown vegetation, were the remnants of something. Stones, large, moss-covered stones, arranged in a rough circle. It wasn't a complete circle. Many of the stones had fallen or been moved, but the outline was still discernible. "The standing stones," Seraphina whispered, her voice filled with awe and a touch of fear. Alaric nodded, his gaze fixed on the stones, his expression unreadable. "The temple," he said, his voice a low murmur. "Or what's left of it." They approached the clearing cautiously, their steps slow and deliberate. As they drew closer, Seraphina felt a surge of energy, a powerful force that seemed to emanate from the stones, from the very earth beneath their feet. And then they heard it, a low growl coming from the shadows, from beyond the circle of trees. A growl that sent a shiver down Seraphina's spine, a primal fear that bypassed her rational mind and spoke directly to her instincts. Alaric stiffened, his body tensing, his silver eyes flashing with a fierce, untamed light. He stepped in front of Seraphina, shielding her, his hand instinctively reaching for the hilt of something. A weapon hidden beneath his coat. "Stay behind me," he said, his voice a low, guttural command. And out of the shadows, a figure emerged. A large, hulking figure, covered in fur, its eyes glowing with a predatory light. A werewolf. One not of myth, but of flesh and blood. Chapter 14. Scars of the Past. The werewolf stood at the edge of the clearing, a hulking silhouette against the moonlit forest, its growl a low, guttural rumble that vibrated in Seraphina's chest. It was larger than any wolf she had ever seen, its muscles rippling beneath its thick, dark fur, its eyes glowing with an unnerving, predatory light. It was a creature of nightmare, a manifestation of the very fears that had lurked at the edges of her perception since childhood. Alaric remained in front of Seraphina, a shield between her and the beast, his body tense, his hand still resting on the hilt of the hidden weapon beneath his coat. He didn't speak, didn't move, but Seraphina could feel the controlled power emanating from him, a silent warning to the creature before them. The werewolf took a step forward, its claws clicking on the exposed stones of the ancient temple, its growl deepening, becoming more menacing. It lowered its head, its eyes fixed on Alaric, its posture challenging. Seraphina felt a surge of panic, a desperate urge to flee, but she knew she couldn't. She was trapped, caught between the werewolf and Alaric. She had trusted him, followed him, and now she was facing the consequences. "Alaric," she whispered, her voice trembling, her hand clutching at his coat. He didn't turn, didn't take his eyes off the werewolf, but she felt his muscles tense beneath her touch. "Stay back," he repeated, his voice a low, guttural command, his tone different, more primal. The werewolf lunged, a blur of fur and teeth, its jaws snapping shut with terrifying force. Alaric moved with astonishing speed, sidestepping the attack, drawing the weapon from beneath his coat. It was a sword, a long, curved blade of polished silver, its surface gleaming in the moonlight. It looked ancient, powerful, a weapon forged for battle. The werewolf snarled, circling Alaric, its eyes filled with a mixture of rage and something else. Something that looked almost like recognition. Alaric held the sword before him, his stance balanced, his movements fluid and graceful. He was a warrior, a protector, a predator. He was everything Seraphina had feared and everything she had come to rely on. The two figures, the man and the beast, faced each other, locked in a silent battle of wills, a dance of death under the hunter's moon. The air crackled with tension, with power, with anticipation. And then the werewolf spoke. "Alaric," it rasped, its voice a guttural growl, distorted and familiar. "You should not have returned." Seraphina gasped, her eyes widening in disbelief. The werewolf, it spoke. And it knew Alaric's name. Alaric stiffened, his grip tightening on the sword, his silver eyes flashing with a mixture of surprise and something else. Something that looked almost like pain. "Kaelin?" he said, his voice a low whisper, his tone laced with disbelief. The werewolf Kaelin chuckled, a harsh, guttural sound that sent shivers down Seraphina's spine. "You remember," it said, its voice dripping with sarcasm. "After all these centuries you still remember." Alaric lowered the sword slightly, his expression clouded with confusion. "What would happen to you?" he asked, his voice filled with a mixture of concern and horror. Kaelin took a step closer, his eyes glowing with a malevolent light. "You did this to me, Alaric," he snarled. "You and that witch. You cursed me, imprisoned me, left me to rot in this form." Seraphina felt a chill run down her spine. Kaelin, he was another victim of the curse, another being trapped by Rhiannon's magic. But he was different from Alaric. He was consumed by rage, by hatred, by darkness. It wasn't meant to be like this, Alaric said, his voice filled with regret. Rhiannon, she acted out of fear, out of desperation. She didn't understand, she understood enough. Kaelin snarled, interrupting him. She knew the power you possessed, the danger you represented. And she chose to sacrifice us. To protect her precious town. He lunged again, faster this time, his claws raking across Alaric's arm, drawing blood. Alaric cried out, not in pain, but in anguish. He stumbled back, his sword clattering to the ground. Seraphina screamed, her heart pounding with terror. She wanted to help, to do something, but she was frozen, paralyzed by fear. Kaelin stood over Alaric, his eyes glowing with triumph, his fangs bared in a predatory grin. Now, he said, his voice a guttural growl. You will pay for your sins, Alaric. You will suffer as I have suffered. He raised his claw, ready to deliver the final blow. But he stopped, his eyes widening. He could feel another presence. Chapter 15. A glimmer of redemption. Kaelin froze, his raised claw suspended in midair, his predatory gaze shifting from Alaric to Seraphina. He sniffed the air, his eyes narrowing, his expression shifting from triumph to confusion. The witch's blood, he growled, his voice a guttural rumble, his eyes burning with a mixture of hatred and something else. Something that looked almost like fear. Seraphina felt a chill run down her spine. He could sense it, the connection, the soul bond, the curse. She was Rhiannon's descendant, the inheritor of her power and her guilt. She instinctively stepped forward, placing herself between Kaelin and Alaric, her body trembling, her heart pounding with terror. But she couldn't stand by and watch him kill Alaric. She couldn't. Stop, she said, her voice trembling, but firm, her eyes meeting Kaelin's. This isn't the way. This won't solve anything. Kaelin chuckled, a harsh, guttural sound that sent shivers down her spine. You dare to speak to me, witchling? He snarled. You, who carry the blood of the one who cursed me. I know what Rhiannon did, Seraphina said, her voice gaining strength, fueled by a newfound determination. And I know it was wrong. But Alaric, he's not responsible. He's a victim, just like you. Kaelin's eyes narrowed, his gaze searching hers, as if trying to assess the truth of her words. He sniffed the air again, his expression conflicted. He carries the scent of the moon, he said, his voice a low growl, his tone uncertain. He is changed. Seraphina nodded, her gaze holding his. He is, she said, her voice firm, resolute. He's not the same creature that Rhiannon imprisoned. He's different. She reached out, her hand hovering just inches from Kaelin's snout, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and compassion. It was a reckless act, a desperate gamble, but she had to try. She had to reach him, to appeal to whatever humanity remained within him. Please, she said, her voice a soft whisper, her eyes filled with a plea. Let us help you. Let us break the curse together. Kaelin stared at her, his eyes flickering, his body trembling. He was struggling, wrestling with the conflicting forces within him, the rage, the hatred, the darkness, and a faint glimmer of something else. Something that looked almost like hope. And then, slowly, he lowered his head, his eyes closing, his growl subsiding. He backed away, his body shaking, his form shifting. Seraphina watched in disbelief as Kaelin's fur receded, his claws retracted, his body transformed. He was no longer a werewolf, a creature of nightmare, but a man, a broken, scarred man, his eyes filled with pain and shame. He collapsed to his knees, his head in his hands, his body racked with sobs. I can't control it, he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. The rage, the darkness, it consumes me. Alaric, who had been lying on the ground, slowly sat up, his arm bleeding, his expression filled with compassion. He crawled towards Kaelin, his hand reaching out to him. I know, he said, his voice a low murmur, his tone gentle and understanding. I know what it's like, Kaelin. I've been there. He placed his hand on Kaelin's shoulder, and Kaelin flinched, but he didn't pull away. He looked up at Alaric, his eyes filled with desperation. Can you help me?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper, his tone pleading. Alaric nodded, his gaze holding Kaelin's. "Yes," he said, his voice firm, resolute. "We will help you, Kaelin. We will break the curse together." Seraphina stood there, watching them, her heart filled with a mixture of relief, gratitude, and hope. She had witnessed a miracle, a transformation, a redemption. She had seen the power of compassion, of understanding, of forgiveness. And she knew that they were not alone in this fight. They had an ally, a companion, another victim of the curse, another soul seeking freedom. The moon, still hanging high above, illuminated the three of them, bound by a shared past and a now shared future. Chapter 16. The Gathering Storm. The fragile alliance forged under the hunter's moon was a turning point, a glimmer of hope in the encroaching darkness. Kaelin, no longer a raging beast, but a broken man grappling with the consequences of a centuries-old curse, joined Seraphina and Alaric in their quest to find the grimoire and break the binding spell. Kaelin's knowledge of the ancient temple, of the rituals performed there, of the secrets hidden within its walls, proved invaluable. He remembered fragments of his past life, glimpses of the time before Rhiannon's curse, of a brotherhood, a sacred duty, and a betrayal. He led them to a hidden entrance, a narrow passage concealed behind a fallen stone, leading down into the earth, into the heart of the temple. The air grew colder as they descended, the scent of damp earth and ancient stone filling their senses. The darkness was absolute, broken only by the beam of Seraphina's flashlight and the faint, silvery glow that emanated from Alaric. They found themselves in a large, circular chamber, its walls lined with carvings, intricate symbols that depicted scenes of rituals, battles, and sacrifices. In the center of the chamber was a stone altar, stained with something dark and ancient. "This is where it happened," Kaelin said, his voice a low whisper, his tone heavy with regret. "This is where Rhiannon performed the binding ritual." Seraphina felt a chill run down her spine. She could almost feel the energy of the past, the echoes of the ancient magic, the pain and suffering that had been inflicted here. Alaric walked towards the altar, his silver eyes scanning the carvings, his expression thoughtful. "The grimoire," he said, his voice a low murmur. "It's not here, but it's close." He pointed to a particular symbol on the wall, a circle enclosing a serpent, its tail biting its own head, the Ouroboros, a symbol of eternity, of cyclical time, and of hidden knowledge. "This is the key," he said, his voice firm, resolute. "This symbol, it represents a hidden chamber, a secret place where Rhiannon stored her most precious possessions, including the grimoire." Kaelin stepped forward, his gaze fixed on the symbol. I remember," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "There was a passage behind the altar, but it was sealed. With magic." Alaric turned to Seraphina, his silver eyes meeting hers. "Your blood, Seraphina," he said, his voice a low whisper. "It holds the power to unlock the seal, just as it holds the power to break the curse." Seraphina hesitated, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. She knew what she had to do, but the thought of spilling her blood, of performing a ritual, of unleashing magic terrified her. But she looked at Alaric, at his unwavering gaze, at his trust in her. And she looked at Kaelin, at his hope for redemption, for freedom. And she knew she couldn't back down. She took a deep breath and, drawing the small silver knife from her bag, made a small cut on her palm. The blood welled up, a crimson droplet against her pale skin. Alaric guided her hand, placing her bleeding palm against the Ouroboros symbol on the wall. The stone felt cold beneath her touch, but as her blood made contact, she felt a surge of energy, a tingling sensation that spread through her entire body. The symbol began to glow, a faint, silver light that intensified, illuminating the chamber, revealing a hidden passage behind the altar, a narrow opening leading into darkness. The seal was broken, but as the passage opened, a sudden gust of wind swept through the chamber, extinguishing Seraphina's flashlight, plunging them into absolute darkness. And then they heard it. A low growl, coming from the passage, from the depths of the earth. A growl that was different from Kaelin's, deeper, more menacing. "Something's coming," Kaelin said, his voice strained, his tone laced with fear. Alaric drew his sword, the silver blade gleaming faintly in the darkness, his body tensing, his senses heightened. He stepped in front of Seraphina and Kaelin, shielding them, his posture defensive. And, out of the darkness, a figure emerged. A figure cloaked in shadows, its eyes glowing with a malevolent, red light. A figure that was neither human nor beast, but something else. Something ancient, something powerful, something evil. A storm was brewing, and its center was walking toward them. Chapter 17. Into the heart of darkness. The figure that emerged from the darkness was an embodiment of dread, a creature that seemed to have crawled out of the deepest recesses of nightmare. It was tall and gaunt, its limbs unnaturally long and thin, its skin a sickly pale color, stretched taut over sharp bones. It wore a tattered cloak that concealed most of its form, but its face was visible, a skull-like visage with hollow cheeks, a lipless mouth filled with sharp, pointed teeth, and eyes that burned with a malevolent, red light. It didn't speak, didn't growl, but its presence radiated a palpable sense of evil, a darkness that seemed to suck the very air out of the chamber, leaving Seraphina gasping for breath. Alaric stood firm, his silver sword held before him, a beacon of light against the encroaching darkness. He didn't flinch, didn't waver, but Seraphina could feel the tension in his body, the controlled power that emanated from him, a silent warning to the creature before them. Kaelin, standing behind Alaric, trembled, his eyes wide with terror. It's a guardian," he whispered, his voice choked with fear. "A creature of the old magic bound to protect the grimoire." Seraphina felt a surge of panic, a desperate urge to flee, but she knew she couldn't. She was trapped, caught between the guardian and Alaric. She had trusted him, followed him, and now she was facing the ultimate test. The guardian took a step forward, its movements slow and deliberate, its red eyes fixed on Alaric, its posture challenging. It raised a hand, its long, skeletal fingers pointing towards them, and a wave of cold energy swept through the chamber, extinguishing the faint, silvery glow that had emanated from Alaric, plunging them into complete darkness. Seraphina cried out, her hand reaching for Alaric, her fingers brushing against his coat. She could feel him, his warmth, his presence, a reassuring anchor in the terrifying darkness. "Stay close," he said, his voice a low, guttural command, his tone focused. He moved, a blur of motion in the darkness, his sword a silver streak, slashing through the air. Seraphina could hear the clash of metal against something, the sound of flesh tearing, the growl of the guardian, a sound that was both pained and furious. The battle raged in the darkness, a chaotic dance of death, a struggle between light and darkness, between good and evil. Seraphina could only stand there, helpless, her heart pounding with terror, her senses overwhelmed by the sounds of the fight, the scent of blood, the palpable sense of danger. She could hear Kaelin beside her, his breath coming in ragged gasps, his body trembling. He was terrified just like her, but he didn't run. He stayed, his presence a small comfort in the overwhelming darkness. Suddenly, there was a loud crash, followed by silence. A silence that was even more terrifying than the sounds of the battle. Seraphina held her breath, her heart pounding, her eyes straining to see through the darkness. She could hear nothing. No movement, no breathing, no sound. "Alaric?" she whispered, her voice trembling, her hand reaching out blindly, searching for him. And then she felt it. A hand, grasping hers, strong and firm, yet gentle. "Alaric." "I'm here," he said, his voice a low whisper, his breath warm against her ear. "It's over." He pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her, holding her tight. Seraphina buried her face in his chest, her body shaking with relief. He was alive, he was safe, and he had protected her. Slowly, a faint light began to emanate from Alaric, a soft, silvery glow that gradually illuminated the chamber, revealing the scene before them. The guardian lay on the ground, its body dissolving, fading into nothingness, its red eyes extinguished. Alaric stood over it, his sword dripping with something dark and viscous, his expression grim. He was wounded, his clothes torn, his body bleeding, but he was alive. Kalen stood beside them, his eyes wide with disbelief, his expression a mixture of relief and awe. You defeated it, he whispered, his voice filled with wonder. Alaric nodded, his gaze meeting Seraphina's. His silver eyes, usually so intense, so unreadable, were now filled with exhaustion and something else. Something that looked almost like gratitude. He sheathed his sword and turned towards the passage, towards the heart of darkness. The grimoire, he said, his voice a low murmur. It's in there. We must retrieve it. Seraphina nodded, her heart still pounding, but her fear replaced by a newfound determination. They had come this far, faced this much danger, and they wouldn't turn back now. They would retrieve the grimoire, and they would break the curse together. They stepped forward. Into the unknown. Chapter 18. Shattered Reflections. The passage beyond the Guardian's chamber was narrow and claustrophobic, the air thick with the scent of dust and decay. The walls were lined with more of the intricate carvings, depicting scenes of ancient rituals, forgotten gods, and creatures of darkness. Seraphina felt a growing sense of unease, a prickling sensation on her skin, as if they were walking into the very heart of the curse, into the source of the ancient magic that had bound Alaric and Kalen for centuries. Alaric, his silvery glow illuminating their path, led the way, his movements cautious and deliberate, his senses heightened, alert for any further threats. Kalen followed close behind, his eyes darting nervously from side to side, his body still trembling from the encounter with the Guardian. The passage opened into a small, circular chamber, its walls lined with shelves filled with ancient scrolls, dusty tomes, and strange artifacts. In the center of the chamber, resting on a pedestal of polished obsidian, was a book bound in silver, its cover adorned with intricate symbols, its pages shimmering with a faint, ethereal light. The grimoire. Seraphina felt a surge of relief, of triumph. They had found it. The key to breaking the curse, to freeing Alaric and Kalen, to ending this nightmare. Alaric approached the pedestal, his silver eyes fixed on the book, his expression reverent. He reached out, his hand hovering just inches above the cover, his fingers trembling slightly. This is it, he said, his voice a low whisper, his tone laced with awe. Rhiannon's grimoire. The secrets of her magic, the key to our freedom. He gently touched the cover, and the book opened, its pages turning of their own accord, revealing intricate diagrams, cryptic symbols, and ancient incantations. The air in the chamber crackled with energy, a palpable force that made Seraphina's hair stand on end. Alaric began to read, his voice a low murmur, his words unfamiliar, yet strangely resonant. They were words of power, words of magic, words that seemed to vibrate in the very air around them. As he read, the symbols on the pages began to glow, a faint, silver light that intensified, illuminating the chamber, revealing something hidden within the walls. Mirrors. Large, ornate mirrors, concealed behind the shelves, their surfaces reflecting the silvery light, creating a dazzling, disorienting effect. Seraphina gasped, her eyes widening in surprise. The mirrors weren't ordinary, they were portals, gateways to somewhere else. And then she saw it. In one of the mirrors, a reflection not of herself, not of Alaric, not of Kalen, but of someone else. A woman, tall and regal, with fiery red hair and piercing green eyes. Rhiannon. But it wasn't just a reflection. It was her, Rhiannon, alive, somehow, trapped within the mirror, her eyes filled with sorrow and regret. Alaric, Seraphina whispered, her voice trembling, her hand reaching out to him. But Alaric didn't hear her. He was lost in the grimoire, in the incantations, in the magic. He was chanting louder now, his voice filled with power, his body radiating a blinding light. The mirrors began to shake, the reflections within them distorting, blurring, becoming monstrous. Rhiannon's image was replaced by something else. Something dark, something evil, something familiar. The Guardian. But it wasn't just one Guardian. There were dozens of them, emerging from the mirrors, their red eyes glowing, their skeletal hands reaching out, their forms solidifying. Kalen screamed, his body collapsing to the ground, his eyes filled with terror. They're coming through, he cried. The magic, it's too strong. Alaric, still chanting, seemed oblivious to the danger, lost in his obsession with breaking the curse. He was unleashing a power he couldn't control, a force that was threatening to consume him, to consume them all. Seraphina realized, with a chilling certainty, that they had made a terrible mistake. They had found the grimoire, but they had also unleashed something far worse. Something that Rhiannon had sought to contain, something that was now free. She knew she had to stop him, before the reflections shattered, and the darkness spilled through. Chapter 19. The Rebirth of Hope. Seraphina lunged forward, grabbing Alaric's arm, trying to pull him away from the grimoire, from the swirling vortex of magic that he had unleashed. Alaric, stop, she cried, her voice desperate, her grip tightening on his arm. You don't know what you're doing. He didn't respond, didn't even seem to notice her presence. He was completely consumed by the incantation, his eyes glazed over, his body radiating a blinding light, his voice a distorted, inhuman roar. The Guardians were emerging from the mirrors, their forms solidifying, their red eyes fixed on Seraphina and Kalen, their skeletal hands reaching out, their hunger palpable. Kalen, still cowering on the ground, was screaming, his voice a high-pitched wail of terror. He was no help, lost in his own fear, his own trauma. Seraphina knew she had to act, and she had to act fast. She couldn't let Alaric continue, couldn't let the Guardians consume them. She had to break the spell, stop the incantation, somehow save them. She looked at the grimoire, still open on the pedestal, its pages shimmering with an unholy light, its symbols pulsing with a dangerous energy. She couldn't read the ancient language, couldn't understand the incantations, but she knew, instinctively, that the book was the key, the source of the chaos. She had to close it. She released Alaric's arm, and, with a surge of adrenaline-fueled strength, she slammed the grimoire shut. The effect was instantaneous. The chanting stopped. The blinding light receded. The mirrors stopped shaking, the reflections within them fading, dissolving. The Guardians froze, their forms flickering, becoming less solid. Alaric gasped, his eyes clearing, his body collapsing to his knees. He looked around, disoriented, his expression confused. What happened? He whispered, his voice weak, his gaze meeting Seraphina's. Seraphina knelt beside him, her hand reaching out to him, her touch gentle and reassuring. You lost control, she said, her voice trembling, but firm. You were unleashing a power you couldn't handle. Alaric looked at the closed grimoire, his expression horrified. I almost, he stammered, his voice choked with emotion. I almost destroyed us all. He looked at Seraphina, his silver eyes filled with gratitude and something else. Something that looked almost like love. You saved us, he said, his voice a low whisper, his hand reaching out to her, his fingers intertwining with hers. Seraphina nodded, her heart filled with a mixture of relief, exhaustion, and a growing sense of hope.
They had survived.
They had faced the darkness, and they had prevailed. But the danger wasn't over. The Guardians, though weakened, were still there, their forms flickering, their red eyes still burning with a malevolent light. They were trapped, unable to fully materialize, but they were waiting. And the grimoire, though closed, still radiated a subtle energy, a silent warning that its power was not to be trifled with. Kalen, slowly recovering from his terror, crawled towards them, his eyes filled with gratitude and a newfound respect for Seraphina. We need to leave, he said, his voice trembling but firm. This place, it's not safe. Alaric nodded, his gaze fixed on the grimoire. He's right, he said, his voice a low murmur. We need to destroy it. We can't risk it falling into the wrong hands. Serafina hesitated. Destroy the grimoire? It was a powerful artifact, a source of ancient knowledge, a key to understanding Rhiannon's magic. But she knew Alaric was right. It was too dangerous, too tempting. It had to be destroyed. Alaric stood up, his body still weak, but his determination unwavering. He reached for his sword, the silver blade gleaming in the faint light, its surface reflecting the hope that had been reborn in the heart of darkness. He had a plan, one that required sacrifice and immense power. Chapter 20. The Final Confrontation of Hearts. Alaric stood before the obsidian pedestal, his silver sword raised, his gaze fixed on the closed grimoire, his expression a mixture of determination and regret. He knew what he had to do, but the thought of destroying such a powerful artifact, such a repository of ancient knowledge, filled him with sorrow. There is another way, Serafina said, her voice firm, her eyes meeting his. Alaric lowered his sword slightly, his gaze questioning. What do you mean? Serafina stepped forward, her hand reaching out towards the grimoire. Rhiannon's magic, it wasn't meant to be destructive, she said, her voice filled with a newfound confidence. It was meant to protect, to heal. The curse, it was a perversion of her intentions, a desperate act born of fear. She looked at Alaric, her eyes shining with an intensity that took his breath away. We don't need to destroy the grimoire, she said. We need to transform it. We need to rewrite the curse, to release its power for good. Alaric hesitated, his mind struggling to grasp the implications of her words. Rewrite the curse?
How?
It was a dangerous proposition, a gamble that could backfire. But he looked at Serafina, at her unwavering gaze, at her belief in him, in them, and he knew she was right. They couldn't simply destroy the grimoire, they had to redeem it. He nodded, his gaze holding hers.
How?
He asked, his voice a low whisper. Serafina stepped closer to the pedestal, her hand hovering just inches above the grimoire. The soul bond, she said, her voice a low murmur. It's the key. It connects us, binds us to Rhiannon, to the curse, to each other. She looked at Kaelin, who stood beside them, his expression hopeful. We need your help, Kaelin, she said. Your connection to the curse, your understanding of its power, it's essential. Kaelin nodded, his eyes filled with a newfound determination. He had been a victim of the curse, but now, he had a chance to be part of its solution. Serafina took a deep breath, and, placing her hand on the cover of the grimoire, she closed her eyes, focusing her mind, her intention, her love. She felt the power surge through her, the energy of the soul bond, the connection to Alaric, to Kaelin, to Rhiannon. She felt the ancient magic, the whispers of the past, the hope for the future. She began to speak, not in the ancient language of the grimoire, but in her own words, words of forgiveness, of healing, of release. We release you, Rhiannon, she said, her voice clear and strong, her words resonating through the chamber. We release you from your vow, from your sacrifice, from your guilt. She felt Alaric's hand on hers, his strength supporting her, his love empowering her. She felt Kaelin's presence beside them, his energy joining theirs, creating a trinity of power. We release you, Alaric, she continued, her voice filled with emotion. We release you from your prison, from your curse, from your darkness. She felt the grimoire tremble beneath her hand, the symbols on its cover glowing with a soft, golden light, replacing the dangerous, silver sheen. We release you, Kaelin, she said, her voice filled with compassion. We release you from your rage, from your pain, from your transformation. The light intensified, filling the chamber, bathing them in its warmth, its healing power. The mirrors, which had previously reflected darkness and danger, now shimmered with a clear, pristine light, reflecting hope. And then it was over. The light subsided, the energy dissipated, leaving a sense of peace, of tranquility, of completion. Serafina opened her eyes, her gaze meeting Alaric's. His silver eyes, usually so intense, so unreadable, were now filled with tears. We did it, he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. We broke the curse. Kalen, standing beside them, was transformed. He was no longer the broken, scarred man, haunted by the darkness of his past. He was whole, healed, his eyes filled with peace and gratitude. The grimoire, now closed and radiating a gentle warmth, was no longer a source of danger, but a repository of hope. The curse was rewritten, the power released for good. The guardians were gone, their forms dissolved, their threat extinguished. The chamber, once a place of darkness and fear, was now a sanctuary of light and healing. The final confrontation had taken place, not with swords or magic, but with courage, compassion, and love, between three hearts that had finally been set free. Epilogue. The years that followed were a testament to the power of healing, of forgiveness, and of love. Seraphina and Alaric, freed from the curse that had bound them for centuries, built a life together in Havenwood, a life filled with a quiet joy, a deep connection, and a shared purpose. They used their knowledge of the ancient magic, gleaned from the transformed grimoire, not for power or control, but for the good of the community, for healing the sick, for protecting the vulnerable, for nurturing the land. They became the guardians of Havenwood, not through force or fear, but through compassion and understanding. Kalen, too, found peace. He remained in Havenwood, a valued member of the community, his past trauma healed, his inner demons tamed. He used his unique abilities, his connection to the natural world, to help others, to protect the forests and the creatures that dwelled within them. The old graveyard, once a place of shadows and whispers, became a sanctuary, a place of remembrance and respect. Seraphina often visited Thomas's grave, sharing her stories, her joys, and her sorrows. She knew he would have understood, would have approved. He had always wanted her to be happy, to find love again, and she had. The weeping willow by the river, where Alaric had first shown her the truth of his existence, became their special place, a place where they would often go to renew their connection, to remember the journey they had taken together, to celebrate their freedom. One evening, as the sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the landscape, Seraphina and Alaric stood beneath the willow, their hands intertwined, their hearts filled with gratitude. "I never imagined," Seraphina said, her voice a soft whisper, her gaze meeting Alaric's, "that my life would take such a turn, that I would find love again, in such an unexpected way." Alaric smiled, his silver eyes reflecting the setting sun, his gaze filled with adoration. "Nor I," he said, his voice a low murmur. "But fate, it works in mysterious ways. It brought us together, across time and space, bound us by a curse and freed us by love." He leaned down, his lips brushing against hers, a gentle kiss that spoke of a deep, abiding affection, a connection that transcended the physical, the supernatural. It was a kiss that sealed their bond, their love, their forever. The river flowed beside them, whispering secrets to the ancient willow, a testament to the enduring power of hope, of redemption, and of the transformative magic of love. The curse was broken, the darkness dispelled, and a new chapter had begun, a chapter filled with light, with love, and with endless possibilities. Life, even at an older age, could take unexpected